Hi, theory students. The second part of our chapter on phrase structure and motivic analysis is about periods, or in other words, how phrases in combination can form larger units. In order to follow this discussion for this video cast, get your textbooks so that you can look at the examples that you're going to be hearing me describe. The definition of a period is two or more phrases that form a musical unit, with the last phrase having the strongest cadence. The most common kind of period is two phrases in which the first one ends with a half cadence and the second one with a perfect authentic cadence. If you look in your book at example 18.9, you'll hear the very familiar tune of O Susanna. Listen to this pair of four-measure phrases, half cadence in measure 4, perfect authentic cadence in measure 8. There, that formed a period. We can also have a period if the first cadence is a half cadence and the second is an imperfect authentic, or if the first is imperfect authentic and the last one is perfect authentic. The requirement really is that the last phrase has the strongest cadence of all the ones we're hearing in the period. This kind of question and answer nature of the two phrases is sometimes called an antecedent and consequent pair. The first of the two is the antecedent, the second of the two is the consequent. If the consequent phrase begins as the antecedent does, it forms a parallel period. Listen to O Susanna again, and this time notice that the second phrase begins the same way that the first phrase does. There, that's a parallel period. For a contrasting period, listen to example 18.10 from a Beethoven sonata, and we'll hear the second phrase begin in a different way from the first phrase. The first phrase will have a half cadence, the second phrase will have an authentic cadence. Let's listen to this again. There's our first phrase, half cadence. Second begins differently, perfect authentic cadence. That's a contrasting period. Other concepts for periods would be a modulating period in which the consequent phrase goes to a new key but still has a strong cadence in that new key. A symmetrical period in which each of the two phrases are the same length, like the two examples we just heard. Or an asymmetrical period in which the two phrases, the antecedent and consequent phrases, may be of differing lengths. Let's see for ourselves how we can write parallel or contrasting periods. Let's take, for example, this four-measure phrase in the key of F. And of course, with a 5 chord there, this would have a half cadence. That's our antecedent phrase. If I wanted to write a parallel consequent phrase, I will start it the same way and write it this way. The first two measures will be just the same as they were before, And now I have to maneuver it so that I get an authentic cadence at the end. I can do that. This way, and if I imagine that I've got a 5 chord with an anticipation and a 1 chord there. Let me play the two of these together. That would be a parallel period. What if I wanted to do a contrasting period? Okay, let's erase all of this, and we'll start the consequent phrase over again. So remember, antecedent phrase, now let me start in a different way than the way the antecedent phrase started. I can answer that. And then something simple with a 5 chord there and a 1 chord there and a perfect authentic cadence. Let's hear all of this together as a contrasting period. Okay, note that we've still got half cadence, perfect authentic cadence, phrase 1, phrase 2, that's our period. But this time, the way the first phrase begins is not the way the second phrase begins. There's some motivic similarity, this being a kind of inversion of the contour of that. But when we hear the two of them, we don't feel that the second phrase is beginning the same way the first phrase is beginning. That's the contrast part of things. Back to our book now. Example 18.12 is a good example of an expanded period structure, namely the 3-phrase period. Here, the 3-phrase period has 2 weaker cadences, followed by a strong cadence at the end. If you think of each phrase and their motivic structures, it could be A, A, B, A, B, B prime, A, B, A prime, or A, B, C. But either way, whichever way you do it, the last phrase has to have the strong cadence. So here's the Mozart example, Mozart aria, Voi che sapete. Half cadence. Half cadence again. Perfect authentic cadence at the end. So in that case, each of the 3 phrases were different motivically, so that would be the ABC structure. And finally, we've got a double period, and for a double period, those are 4 phrases, and among the 4 phrases, Only the last one has a strong cadence. There are all kinds of ways the 4 can be arranged. Typically, most of the double periods are either imperfect authentic and half cadence, and then it begins the same way, imperfect authentic, this time to a perfect authentic. That's one structure. Or you could have a half cadence to imperfect, and then a half cadence to a perfect authentic cadence. Listen to this Mozart sonata, and this is from the next example in your book. And listen to the cadence structure here. Imperfect authentic, half cadence, imperfect authentic, and perfect. And this, by the way, is example 18.13. Here we go. Imperfect authentic cadence. Half cadence. Imperfect authentic. And perfect authentic cadence at the end. That's our double period. And finally, there are other combinations. Sometimes what may appear to be a double period is really just a repeated period if there's a perfect authentic cadence at the end of the second phrase, and then we hear the same two phrases with the same perfect authentic cadence at the end of the fourth phrase. So that's just a repeated period. Here's the first period, here's the second period. Or sometimes we have a group of phrases that appear to belong together, but if each phrase has an inconclusive cadence, including the last phrase, we don't call that a period, but rather we just call that a phrase group. That's the lesson for today. We'll go over this a little bit more in class.